Engine swaps. It's one of those great topics of conversation, isn't it? A brilliant discussion to have down the pub with all of your mates, because the combinations, the possibilities are absolutely endless. And after all, who wouldn't want to see a McLaren 675 LT with a screaming Ferrari V12 in the back of it? But the truth is that for the vast majority of people, in the pub is kind of where it stays. Once upon a time, doing an engine swap was actually a fairly common thing, because 40, 50 years ago, we had a nation of people who were more than willing to get their hands dirty, work on their own cars of a weekend, if for no other reason than very often that was the only choice that you had if you wanted to be able to use your car to get to work on Monday. And swapping an engine wasn't really as difficult a task as it may seem, because the engines were small, the engine bays were big, the electronics very simple, and because manufacturers wanted to save money, everything was pretty modular. But these days, you can hardly really even see an engine in a sports car, let alone think of changing it. Today, the spirit of the amateur mechanics of the 1970s and 80s is largely gone, but in a few car communities it still exists. Perhaps there is no better example of this than with the Mazda MX5, or as our friends across the pond call it, the Miata. And that's for a number of reasons. They are small, good-looking cars, very easy to purchase, with a plethora of aftermarket tuning parts available, and most crucially, not a lot of power from the factory, despite having an absolutely sublime chassis. And that means that most people that buy an MX5 do so and then find themselves wanting a little bit more. In fact, tuning is such a core part of Japanese car culture that the very first MX5s were already shipped with a little oil feed line pre-drilled into the block that served absolutely no purpose whatsoever unless you were going to turbocharge the car. For me, turbocharging something like this is a very quick way of ruining it. A car like an MX5 should be all about the way it talks to you, the way it responds to your inputs, and to introduce any form of delay or lag really is just to make a mess of the entire thing. You want everything that you ask this car to do to be done straight away. One man who agrees with that is called Bruce. Bruce has a very impressive CV and has worked at a number of different car companies and tuning firms. It's while he was at Overfinch that he got the idea to build this. You see, they still do a fair number of engine swaps, chiefly with V8s, and he did briefly consider putting a V8 into an MX5. It can be done, and it has been done, but as far as he was concerned, that probably would ruin the car nearly as much as turbocharging it would, because then what you'd have really wouldn't be so much a sports car anymore, more a pint-sized muscle car, and that really would then lose all the character that he so much adored in these cars. So what to get? Well, he didn't like the 4-cylinder because he thought it was just perhaps a little bit plain. The V8 was then too much, so 6 cylinders was the obvious solution. A straight 6 will not fit in here, so it had to be a V. Then which to choose? Well, what they went with is the Jaguar AJ30, perhaps best known as the power plant in the 3-litre S-Type. It's a Ford unit technically, a Duratec, and they have appeared in things like the Mondeo, the ST220, and stuff like a Noble as well. They used different versions of that engine. The Jaguar one apparently is one of the best, having a forged steel crankshaft and being made pretty well. It's not actually identical, though you might think it, to a Ford unit. For extra car bore points, you can also tell your friends that it started off as a Porsche design and then Cosworth had a hand in it somewhere along the lines. But really, all most people will care about is what it looks like, because it is a stunner. Now, not only is it aesthetically pleasing, but there's also a lot about this that just makes sense. It is all aluminium, quad cam, so it revs nicely. It's very over square. Peak power is at just below 7,000 RPM. Because the original unit is cast iron, this setup is actually lighter than the original Mazda unit. They even have throttle bodies made to Rocketeer's own design by Rocketeer themselves, cable operated for instantaneous response, and these sensational carbon fibre intake plenums. These engines are also very easy to source and economical to purchase. However, Rocketeer don't just sort of throw them in there and chuck a lick of paint on. They are completely stripped down and balanced by their partners at Bassett Down Balancing, and I have to say they do a wonderful job because, as you'll see, this engine drives and sounds fantastic. Now, other modifications are of course performed at the same time. There's an upgraded radiator in here, and the donor car is whatever you want it to be, but here it's a Mark 2.5 Sport, meaning it has a few optional extras like the limited slip diff at the back, which is very handy. When this was a Jaguar unit, made around 240 horsepower, but thanks to a result of only the improved inlet and the balancing work, it now makes around 275 horsepower. That's pretty healthy. If you've heard the Rocketeer name before, but you can't quite place it, you're either thinking of the 1991 Disney action movie directed by Joe Johnston, criminally underrated, or Alex Kirsten of Car Throttle's Phil, which has also had an MX5 V6 Rocketeer conversion performed. Other than the obvious, the only real modification performed to this car is a set of Fox suspension supplied by Fly-In Miata. Beyond that, it is bone standard MX5 Mark 2.5. So, I know what you want to know. What's the cost of getting all this done? Well, there's a couple of ways of getting one of these cars. You can commission Rocketeer to build you a turnkey example, or you can do all the work yourself. The cost of the kit is around £10,500 plus VAT. That includes a freshly built and balanced Jaguar engine, all of the pieces you need to fit it to the car, and all of the electronics to make it run. As far as they're concerned, you shouldn't need anything else beyond labour and some tools to get your car converted. If you want them to perform the conversion for you, it's £2,000 plus VAT, which I think is pretty reasonable for work done to a very high standard. You can have your car dynoed and all that jazz, and they do a very good job. Amazingly, very, very few customers actually choose to go that route. If you want something really special though, they can do a resto mod. So not only will they do the V6 conversion, but you can also have any number of exterior or interior options performed. You could have this car set up for track days, for road trips, for B-road blasts. However you want your V6 MX5, they will do it. In fact, they're currently working on a twin turbo conversion for a customer, which I think somewhat defeats the point, but that's what they want. And the key thing is, that's what they'll get. I strongly considered a Rocketeer MX5 before I eventually purchased my S2000. I was put off by something really fairly simple. The idea that after I'd spent £15,000 to £20,000, what I'd be left with inside and outside was ultimately still 2,000 or 3,000 quid's worth of MX5. And that really is kind of the main downside of this car, because as it stands, it doesn't feel or look particularly special, either in or out. There is one concession to modernity, which is the fitment of an Android Auto and Apple CarPlay compatible Pioneer doubled-in head unit. It's actually quite good. The speakers in here are really shockingly decent. The dials, however, are very, very old school, sort of Japanese retro-ish car. The indicator stalks, same thing again, very 90s Japanese. And it doesn't feel especially upmarket. But I did get as far as having some conversations with Bruce, and I have to say, I was really impressed at how professional and personable he was. Anyone who's dealt with the kit car world will know that some of the characters involved can be a little bit coarse, and he is nothing of the sort. If you're the kind of person that's worried about dealing with a little company like that, have no fears. Rocketeer is a very, very professional outfit. Any problems with the interior or exterior can of course be changed, something easily done if you decide to go the resto mod route, and Rocketeer are happy to organise that for you. But that's not what I'm here to evaluate today. I want to see what this car drives like, because this is a pretty dramatic change to be making to a fairly small car. And the ethos of the whole Rocketeer project is to keep everything in balance. They want to improve the MX5 without ruining any of its many fine qualities. So have they achieved that? Have they managed to simply make this car a little bit better without upsetting the delicate equilibrium? Let's find out. Bruce has placed an awful lot of faith in me by lending me this car for a few days for a couple of reasons. First off, this is pretty much their main demo vehicle, and were I to write it off, that would cause a small business a very serious inconvenience. Secondly, as a small business, any negative review out there really probably would do them some harm. He knows that I am a very vocal and outspoken person who will not shy away from the negatives, and indeed this car does have a few of them, but by and large Bruce really didn't need to worry at all, because I would say with this car he really has achieved pretty much all of the things he set out to do. In many ways, of course, this does still feel like an MX5, but critically that includes some of the absolute finest traits of the car. The handling, which is beautifully balanced, the steering, which weights up in the most wonderful and natural way and could really teach my S2000 a thing or two about how a steering wheel should feel. The excellent visibility, even with the hardtop fitted, and this is on because although it might look nice and sunny out there, it's actually still pretty darn cold. It's only a few degrees today. The 6-speed gearbox, once up to temperature, is really quite slick, although at low speeds the car does have some drivability issues. The idle is very lumpy, you do need a little bit of throttle to get off the line, and the clutch feels like it is struggling just a bit. There's just a moment of judder as you pull away even when the car's warm, and when it's cold, every gear change seems to be accompanied with a little bit of a sort of a jolt. However, that does go away pretty quickly, and once you are on the move, this is genuinely an effortless car to drive. Now, if you were expecting the fitment of this big old Jag V6 to have absolutely transformed the car, well, it has, but not maybe in the way that you would think. It's not really a torque monster when I'm doing 2,000 RPM now, about 40 miles an hour, and if I absolutely plant my foot, the car certainly moves, and now we're doing 50, but it's not going to fire you down the road or annihilate its rear tyres. That was never the aim. This car really is all about that balance. It's a word I use a lot because it's really so important, so easy to over-egg something like this. AJ30, they really have found the perfect partner for the little MX5. This is a nice, beautiful, linear, naturally aspirated unit with a wondrous soundtrack. You can really hear that it has been balanced. For some reason, balanced engines just don't sound the same as your regular, ordinary ones. This is a magical engine. The constant crackles and burbles don't feel synthetic here. They suit the car down to a T. Now, for a long journey, it's a little bit tiring because one of my issues is the gearing. At motorway speeds, you're doing over 3,000 RPM, and even with the hardtop on, it's a fairly noisy car. But this isn't a GT, this is a pure out-and-out sports car. Now, one thing that does surprise me is this car's grip level. It has 205 section tyres all round. So that's pretty narrow for a car with 275 horsepower. That's not a lot of rubber at the back, but it works so very well, and that I think was actually an inspired choice, and it changes entirely the character of this car and makes it something that I didn't really think it would be. You see, all the MX5 really ever wanted to be was an old school British sports car. Even Mazda themselves will tell you that this is ultimately a Lotus Elan just built well. 100 odd horsepower may have been perfectly fine in the 1960s, in fact in some cases very remarkable, but the truth is by the time this car came out wasn't really a huge amount anymore. By fitting this V6 up front, what Rocketeer have done really is turned this car into the sort of forgotten British roadster that it was always trying to be. And there's a very specific character there. If you're the kind of person that wants to absolutely thrash down these roads, hell for leather, going as quickly as you possibly can, this exact car is not the right one. The ultimate grip level is probably not there. The speed is not really quite there. But this isn't about any of that. This is about the driving experience. Because this car has no driver aids in it really to speak of at all, it's all about me, the machine and the road, all working together in this sort of joyous menage a trois of motoring pleasure. This, I don't think, has the outright grip of, say, even my S2000, but that's absolutely fine because it telegraphs its ability level so much more clearly than the Honda that you've got real faith in it to get absolutely on the edge of adhesion, and if you so desire, a little bit beyond. That's not really my style, but this car just wants to please at all times. It is very wet and greasy out there today, so I had to be really careful. Second gear in a bend with the road still nice and chilly. The car will break traction quite happily. The view out of the front is absolutely classic British sports car. You got a hump in the middle and those flanks on either side. You really could be in a sort of pint-size E-Type. The difference being that this is probably a lot faster and better to drive. Now, are there downsides? Of course there are, and there are some really, really big ones. The most fundamental, of course, is also the most obvious. What you're buying into is essentially an MX5 with a V6 in it. And for that, you're going to be paying a decent sum of money. In fact, I don't see any way at the present time of getting into one of these without spending at least the best part of 20,000 quid. And that's a lot when you consider that sat in here, it doesn't look or really feel any different from a £2,000 or £3,000 example. This means that really it is only the most dedicated of MX5 fans or quirky petrol heads that are ever going to want to buy into something like this. I wouldn't, however, go as far as to say this is poor value for money, because I have on occasion commissioned a number of items to be custom made, and if you've ever done that, you'll know that to build something like this would cost a heck of a lot, certainly to the standard that Bruce and his team have done it. The almost complete lack of hints on the outside as to what lurks beneath also means this car really can be classified as a true sleeper. Granted, the moment you turn it on, people will know that something isn't quite right about your MX5, but I think this is the kind of car that you'd love owning, because you'll pull up at a petrol station and someone's ears will prick up and they'll go, that noise doesn't match that car, and they'll want to have a chat with you about it. And I love cars like that. I love cars that make people ask questions. I love cars that make people go, oh, what's that? In a few minutes, I'm going to go and drive a Maserati Quattroporte, and that really is another car very much in the same vein as this. It's the sort of thing that I think everybody looks at and wishes they had the guts to buy, but they never will. Rocketeer also seem to have gotten something of a name for themselves as being a purveyor of these decent, high-quality products, and I think that means that in future, hopefully the values of these cars will be high. So although your cost of entry is going to be above a normal MX5, your cost of ownership hopefully won't be too bad. One other thing I don't like is the fact that because this has the regular MX5's original fuel tank, its range is not very good. In fact, yesterday I achieved barely over 200 miles before having to refill. That's a shame. Again, it's a sports car. If you can live with it, you can live with it, but as a tourer, it's somewhat compromised. A shame really, because the boot's actually quite a good size. I can get all my camera kit in there very happily. I'm really very impressed with the dampers. It'll be so tempting just to try and make this car fairly hard, stiff and really very grippy, and they haven't done that. It still moves, it still bobs and weaves and flows with the road. I know this route very, very well. It's a very demanding test of a car, and this soaks up the lumps and bumps absolutely brilliantly. Means this becomes a car about maintaining speed, and because that engine is quite a bit torquier than the original, it's actually really easy to make progress just off the mid-range, which is lovely. This is the way I love to drive a car like this, something you can't really do in the S2000, at least in its current guise, or in an original MX5. Personally, if I was going to have one of these, I would get Rocketeer to do it, for many reasons. The main one being I'm absolutely useless with any kind of mechanical stuff, but also I would use it as an opportunity to just right some of the wrongs of the base car. It does feel a bit cheap and very classic 90s Japanese in here, so I'd want more leather, I'd want more buckety seats. I think that really would enhance the driving experience. Maybe I'd have it resprayed. I do love the red that they sprayed fill in, which I think is a Mazda colour. The exhaust I'd keep exactly as is. It's perfectly judged. I was worried it was going to be silly loud, but actually it's never really that vocal. It's just right. My major complaint at the present time actually is the fact that this hardtop is stuck on it, which is a shame, but it means at least you can hear me. I know many of you would prefer that wasn't the case, so sorry about that. The Rocketeer MX5 is not a product that's ever going to set the world on fire. It's just too niche and too expensive for that. But for the few people that really do love their little Mazdas and want it to have just that bit more, want it to have the engine it always deserved, I can't think really of a better way to do it. This keeps everything that I love about the MX5. Perhaps most importantly though, what this does is just add a little level of wow that the regular MX5 is lacking. That engine bay is absolutely spectacular, one of the most nicely turned out I have seen in a very long time. And I know for sure that anybody who owns one of these, their favourite thing about it is almost certainly going to be lifting that bonnet up to show people what it actually is up front. This car is absolute proof that although the cottage industry of car tinkering may not be what it once was, it certainly isn't gone. Bruce, you did good. Do I regret buying my S2000? No, absolutely not. Much better inside. I'm happy with the engine, and I'm also really excited to be doing the mods that I'm doing to that car. To have built a Rocketeer the way I would have wanted it would have probably cost 25 grand, and that just is more than I wanted to spend. But for those people who are thinking about doing it, please give Bruce a shout, get yourself in the seat of one of these, and you will buy. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all for the next one. Bye-bye.